Bambiz presents Elder Law Growth, the podcast that helps elder law and estate planning attorneys attract clients without wasting time or money. I'm your host, Jim Blake. Let's dive in.
Welcome back to the Elder Law Growth Podcast. I'd like you to help me welcome back author, coach, attorney, Steve Riley. If you missed the first episode with Steve, go back and then join us here. Steve gives some really great advice in that first episode on the struggles as an attorney, but also how your team can follow up with potential. It's a fantastic episode that leads you right into this one. So let's get started on this month's episode of the Elder Law Growth Podcast.
Let's jump into a little bit about like lead management. And one of my favorite things, and I remember from sponsoring an elder council event back in the day and sitting in the back of the room and hearing you do this. This is something that has stuck out into my mind for years, was a session. And I'm probably not getting it exactly right because, again, I come in and out of those sessions. But like it was you coaching the group on phone etiquette. And, these are like attorneys at this elder council. Just to give a little bit background of what these people are doing. They typically were just about to enter into elder law, and they were coming there, the attorneys, and they had left their firm, some of them for the first time ever, with their answering service or their assistant or their intake person or whoever. And then you we're like, hey, give me your cell phone. Let's call your office and let's hear what it sounds like when somebody picks up. And you had some amazing ones, and you had someone like, well, the attorney's not here. We'll get back to you next week, to ringing 20 different times. And so going into that a little bit about like those first impressions, how important is a first impression? And then also integrating that with kind of what we see as like somebody signs up for an event or somebody requests your ebook or does something like that on the marketing side. And like that first impression is that particular thing, but it's also the follow-up and the friendly voice when somebody is saying, hey, Mrs. Smith, thank you so much for coming to registering for the upcoming workshop that Attorney Blake is hosting at this date and time. So how important is that first impression? What are some of the things that you look for when you're coaching people on those types of calls? I'd love to hear your feedback on that, because that was probably the most entertaining and fun session I think I've seen at any event.
It was a lot of fun. I've done it a couple of times. So what you're referring is what we call an intake audit. So we have a process to make our clients, and we usually have another client be a mystery shopper and call the firm to do an intake audit. And we have a scorecard, like what we expect, what we'd like to see. And the attorney kind of creates a scorecard of what their expectations are. And I would say most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, what the lawyer expects going to happen when that call goes into the firm and what actually happens is night and day. And I learned this, and you probably heard me tell this story a couple of times, because I think, let me set the context this way. The initial consultation for anyone in the elder law and estate planning field is the moment of truth. My experience is, and this is just my experience, is that about 60% of the work that you need to do as an owner of your firm occurs prior to the initial consultation. 40% occurs afterwards. So everything prior to the initial consultation is creating promise in the marketplace, right? You're creating a promise. That might be your marketing promise, your brand promise, your reputation. Everything after the initial consultation is the process to fulfill the promise. And most lawyers think 90% of their work occurs after the initial consultation. And I really think it's completely different. I think about 60% occurs, maybe as much as 80% occurs prior to the initial, because once you get the client and getting the work out the door, it's kind of easy. And I hate to say this, but it's kind of easy, after you've done so many cases and, it kind of gets a little routine. It doesn't mean it's not complicated, but the process to get the work done is pretty easy. So the lawyers that start to really grow their practices and dominate their market when they realize that the bulk of the activities they want to focus on is what I call the prospect pipeline, everything occurring up to that initial consultation. So the initial consultation in itself you and I could probably talk a half a day to a day just on that. And we could talk a little bit about, like, I used to do a presentation of like the 100 stupid things I've seen lawyers do. And I distilled it down to 10
Only
stupid
100.
things I've seen lawyers. It's just remarkable. Prior to that initial consultation, you want to think through, how do you make it a great experience? And how do you make that person delighted to work with your firm. And there's a big distinction between what I call scheduling and selling. Right. So scheduling, somebody calls, yeah, Jim's available at this time next week, blah, 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 blah. But having your intake team understand that really what they're trying to do is do three things. They're trying to provide third-party credibility to you. They're really trying to shine the light on how unique and great it is to work with you. And they're really going to confirm for this prospect that this is the right place and the right time. I got hired by a firm in Texas well, I think the investment to work with me is very reasonable. Some people might consider it a little stiff, a little high. But this lawyer invested to talk to me for an hour about a marketing problem he was having. And he was like, look, I got the best CRM system. We're doing seminars 2 to 3 times a month. We get people to come to the workshops. We get people committing to appointments. We get people not showing up, though. And so we can't figure out what our breakdown is. And so I really want to hire you to help think through this system. So I'm like, okay, yeah, absolutely, no problem. So I call his office for our appointed, for the appointment time. And Jim, I kid you not, the woman that answers the phone answers it like this: law office.
Oh, I've heard that many times. That's a common thing.
Yeah, it's like a common thing.
That's a common thing.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, office. And I'm sitting there thinking that she's got, her glasses hanging over her nose and a cigarette hanging out of her mouth, right? And I'm like, I'm calling to talk to, attorney X. And she goes, do you have an appointment? And I'm like, yeah, I have an appointment. I'll see if he's busy. And I'm like going, okay, so I'm 3 questions in with this woman, and it's very clear that I am the most annoying thing that she's dealt with that day, right? And so no kidding, I get on the phone with this lawyer, and he's just effusive, bubbly, charming, highly marketable, loves to market, and he can't figure out what the hell's going on with his marketing. He spent all this money, and I go, well, let's. So I asked him like a couple of questions. Are you tracking your follow-ups? And he goes, yeah, we are. And I said, okay, can you get me the list? Like, what's happening with your follow-ups? And he goes, well, Marge doesn't like to track that. And I said, is Marge the woman who answered the phone? And he goes, yeah, she answered the phone. I see. And I said, what are you doing with your CRM for, marketing? He goes, well, Marge doesn't like the CRM. She's not using it. I'm like, okay. He goes, but my focus, he says, is not really on her. My focus is why you think our marketing's breaking down, right? And I'm sitting here going, I got a working theory.
Marge is the reason.
yeah. I got a working theory right now, and I don't think you need to hire me, but I think I got a working theory what's happening. I'll be happy to tell you what it is. So I go through like 4 or 5 more questions, and I'm like, okay, so here's my advice. Take Marge out right up back right now and shoot her. She's the problem. She's got to go. And he's like, oh, no. Marge has been here for 25 years. She wants to work here for 30. Then she'll retire. And I'm like, no, she's got to go. And this is where I worry about lawyers that said, do you hire or do you adopt? He adopted Marge. And his practice was stuck at Marge's willingness to change and Marge's willingness to grow. So you can have the most sophisticated marketing, but if you're not managing your team and you don't have somebody on that intake that's warm and pleasant. Funny thing is, it took about 6 months to get rid of Marge, and his practice went from a 1,500 square feet space to 7,500 square foot space. It quadrupled in about 3 years. It blew up. And Marge was just stopping everything coming in the door just because of who she was and how she responded. So if you're thinking about growing your firm and you're thinking about phone etiquette and you're thinking about follow-up, you got to think through everything that occurs. And if you're not creating an incredible experience to the prospect, then you're probably going to have concerns about pricing where they'll say, well, I'm not so sure. This seems like a lot of money. There'll be a lot of uncertainty. There'll be a lot of confusion. The ability to have your team create a warm, inviting environment is absolutely critical. Think about, as you're listening to this and you're walking or doing whatever you're doing in running on your treadmill or what have you. I just want to say, as a lawyer, think about when you've dealt with any type of professional experience, a doctor, an accountant, anywhere that you've gone, and you were treated like crap by the team before you start to work with a professional. Most of the time for me, it's doctors. Most of my interactions with doctors is horrible, and their staff is horrible. And then occasionally when I find one that is really great, I call that doctor's office. I don't talk to anyone except for that team member. And I ask to talk, in this case, I got a doctor, the team member's name is Maritza. I just want to talk to Maritza. I don't want to talk to anyone else. And it makes me loyal to the doctor because Maritza is such a great experience, so she's so awesome. So this is why lawyers, when you're thinking about building your team, why that intake process, your team members are so crucial. So as you start to build, you want to upgrade, and you want to upgrade so you have an experience where everybody on your team wants to help these people come in the door. They want to help you get these people in the door. So the second thing about that is, I would say, train, train, train. So you want to train your team, you want to support your team, you want to teach your team on customer service. But this right here, and I know it sounds so silly and so basic, Jim, but I think one of the secrets that I had to outgrowing most of my competitors, who were all better looking, smarter, more certifications, went to better schools, worked in fancier buildings than I did, was the fact that I had people on my team that were warm, engaging, and I hated voicemail. I still to this day don't like voicemail, but I know it's a part of the world. But if you're in the sales business, which a lot of estate planning and elder law lawyers are, having a barrier called voicemail before you talk to a prospect is dangerous. And I see this happen all the time for people that use any of the remote virtual receptionist services, that it actually slows down cash flow and slows down intake. If even if you want to give a client a service number and use a virtual receptionist for that, that's great. But you want to have a intake number that's answered live, and somebody's like, boom, I'm on top of that. Of course, all that depends on your volume, how much revenue you're doing, your clients, but it's just something I've learned over the years. You can see this all the time in large PI firms where they have separate phone numbers for separate marketing campaigns so they can manage intake better. So enough of that, but those are some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and just some non-attorney, like just to relate it to real world experiences as well. You said the thing about the doctor, where would you rather go? You're going to go to Chick-fil-A to get a better experience, or you're going to go to Burger King? You know what I
Right.
mean? I mean, the way they train the staff, the way that they say my pleasure, that's going to be so different. And then the other one that it rings a bell because I deal with it here, like contractors that have to come to your house, right? I mean, the bar is low, right? You just smiling and putting the little booties on your shoes before you go into somebody's house, before you check on their air conditioner, that goes a long way. So it's not like we're saying like, you have to find like the most bubbly personality person. These people just need to do simple things like smile when they talk, right? Like teach somebody that when they get on the phone and somebody calls them, think like that just smile. That person's paying your paycheck. That person's helping us grow. That person's allowing us to do the things we do and have the impact that we have. And so just a little they call them like what, 2 millimeter shift, a 2 millimeter shift of just smiling when they're talking could change the practice based on some of the things that just heard you say. So just wanted to
Well,
put that out there into the universe as well.
we had a whole training process to be a great receptionist in our firm. And the number one rule is always answer the phone with a smile in your voice. And you have to answer the phone with a smile in your voice. And that was the first rule. The second rule is I had a limit on how long the phone could ring before it was answered. And there were bonuses attached to certain things in my firm, and there were and I would say subtractions when there were certain things in my firm. So we had a very intentional process around out customer servicing the other firms we competed against. So think about it. Think about it just for a minute. If you're trying to build a referral-based practice and you're investing in marketing as well, you're spending a lot of money, and your client acquisition cost is one thing, like what it costs to land a client, but your lead acquisition cost is also something you need to take in consideration. So when I was doing personal injury, a phone call back in the day would cost me $75. And that was a lead. That was just a lead. That wasn't a case. That was a lead. It cost me $75 to get a lead on the phone. So when you're thinking about what you're spending from referrals, with Bambiz, what you're doing is that you're incurring a client acquisition cost. Any barrier, in this example, like Marge, any barrier that makes it harder for the client to hire you increases your client acquisition cost. My question was constantly, how can we make it easier for a prospect to hire us? How can we make it easier for a prospect to hire us? It's still my question today. I'm still struggling in this business.
Yeah, and so like taking it in from the intake, let's move on. They've done the intake, yay. They followed up. They've been warm and bubbly. They're getting people to finally attend their workshop. And now, and I know you have different ways of doing this too. And most of our clients, that is the attorney doing the workshop. Sometimes it's a non-attorney doing the workshop as well, depending on how they're doing it. But they're doing the workshop, and they just teach them and 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 teach them, and then they wave goodbye and then they leave, right? No, that's not what we want, right? So one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that they're structuring their events in a way so that, again, we're going to go back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast, which is like that story brand, right? You are the trusted guide getting them to their destination, which is why they signed up. And you're going to be telling them a story on how to do that. So what would you recommend with your experience on how to set that up so that there are strategic calls to actions in there? Because you didn't just I mean, yes, it's good to give education, and yes, it's good to make the community and be a leader in your community and have these type of events, but you're doing this so you can have the impact, and you can create the documents and you can create the plans for these families. And that's not going to happen if you don't get them into the consultation. So what are some ways that they can strategically set that workshop or webinar up so that there's calls to actions plugged in there, and you assume people know the next step is a consultation. They do not know this, by the way. Make that crystal clear. Say that right now on the podcast. You assume they think they know that the consultation is the next step, and they do not know that. So with that being said, how do we get some calls to actions in there so that we know that we can communicate to our audience? The next step is the consultation, and here's how you do it.
Well, you said a lot there. The first thing I'm going to recommend that the lawyers do is not be so uptight about the educational content, because most of the prospects are there to determine whether they like you, whether they think they can trust you, whether they think what you are talking about can help solve their problem. But the bulk of their analysis will be, do I like you? Do I trust you? Most of their understanding about lawyers is what they see on TV, and how TV projects lawyers is really not good. So what they see about lawyers in the news and on TV and what they read in books, most of which is pretty negative. So if you show up as a pleasant, likable, trustworthy, honest, authentic person, you've got about 80% of the job done. The discussion about the legal technical issues can only turn them off if they've determined that they like you and they trust you. So you have to do some education, but you have to be careful with the education. So I have two pieces of advice, and I usually say these things to lawyers when they're doing workshops. More pictures, more diagrams, less talking. Most people learn and process visually. 3/4 of the population learn and process visually. So the ability to tell pictures, use pictures, tell stories, and diagrams is going to make your workshop go super fast and super easy. Number two, I recommend it, and I've trained a lot of lawyers on this. I recommend 3 calls to action. The first one for me is usually the first 10 minutes in a workshop. And I usually do a pretty straight up call to action. So at the end of the workshop, you're going to have the invitation to do X, and we're going to recommend that you do X by doing the following thing. So that's what we're going to talk about at the end of the workshop, like how to do X. But if you know you want to do X, go ahead and do X now, and we can talk at the break about getting how to get this started for you. Then usually for me, I would do another call to action midway through, usually about midway to 60% through, because by then I've kind of delivered some content. They've listened to me. I've talked to legal technical. And then I would say, okay, now when you schedule the next step, we'll go further and how this applies to your family in particular. So my job is to apply the law, your job to teach the family to me. And so the next step, which will look like this, then we'll do that. So what you have to do to go to the next step is this. And then at the end, usually about 10 minutes left, I would say, okay, we've done a lot today, and I hopefully this was a good investment of your time. Now, some of you have already made a decision to do this, and some of you made a decision to do that. What I'm going to recommend is that you just go ahead and do the next step. Now, the common mistake that I see a lot of lawyers make here, and it's the one that I had to teach all the attorneys that work for me and I worked with, was not to sell the plan. What you want to do is sell the next step. Don't try and sell them a plan. Just sell them the next step, because most of them, if they're coming in through advertising or some form of marketing, unless they're coming through a high level referral, aren't really quite there. And they're not sure, if they trust you. They're not sure if this is worth it, like whatever the investment is. They're not sure what they can afford or whether they can afford it, whether all this is going to be a right fit for them. So talking to them about a plan is a bridge too far for a lot of prospects. It's not whether or not they want to buy a car, it's whether or not they need a car.
Yep. And so I guess one of the things that I want to just ask real quick is I get a lot of, when do you tell them price ranges? When do you show the pricing? Would you show that at the workshop? Would you wait until the consultation to show that? When do you recommend that information be
That's a
brought?
good question. I've experimented a lot with this. It depends on the nature of the workshop. So if the nature of the workshop where you've got cold prospects, I wouldn't hesitate to do price ranges. And so this is for a common estate plan or a common elder plan, proactive plan, not a crisis plan. I wouldn't hesitate to do price ranges. What I usually like to do is I like to draw the price into comparison of something they can relate to. So in the elder law field, the most common thing that you'll hear people do, lawyers do, and something that I did, is that usually what you'll see is the price for our services equivalent to 1 month's nursing home care costs, which is a very common price comparison. So it gives them a anchor price. It's called arbitrary coherence. It's a technique in pricing where you're giving them an anchor to think about. And so they're like, oh, okay, so 1 month's nursing home care costs, if I say 24 months or however much, is a no-brainer. So if you talk about dollars, sometimes it scares them. So it's not really fair to say it be, X dollars. It's really fair to say what it buys you. So one of the things I had to learn to do, especially in the more affluent market and the high net worth market, was to tie the value, the investment they would spend to what it would save and produce for them. If you got more work to do, the more clear you are in your workshop about the pricing, the less tire kickers you get. If you need to get more work in the door, then I would, adjust my pricing during the workshop downward and, practice on leads and practice on people, but not get too stressed out about my conversion numbers, because you're trying to fill up your client base. You're practicing at this point in time, and your numbers aren't going to be that good. So I wouldn't be too stressed about it, but you also know that you're bringing people in with the intention of practicing on them.
And I feel like that's always been a balancing act too. It's like, some people will leave just because of price, but they are qualified. And some people, they want to know before they actually take the next step. So I think that the anchor pricing is a great opportunity for them if they're not using it. Instead of just being like, this is $10,000. It's the price of a nursing home for 1 month. This is going to be this cost of saving that. I like that way that you integrated that. Now, moving into the consultation though, what are some tips that you have to make those consultations smooth, efficient, and turn them, get some more retained clients, help some more people?
I have been studying the initial consultation process in estate planning and elder law field for probably 20 years now. And it boils down to about 6 types of different consultations. So basically the 6 types of estate planning and elder law processes that I've seen lawyers do. I was one of the first attorneys to pioneer the non-lawyer initial, which we would call an empowered team consultation. And I got a link for those people that are interested, Jim, to a podcast I did with one of our coaches, Patty Paz, on how that works. For me, the initial consultation, the worst ones are what I call the hostage negotiation, where the lawyer walks in with a yellow pad and it takes 2 hours and the lawyer is just babbling. And the lawyer has not thought through for one moment what the initial consultation experience should look like from the prospect's perspective. And so for me, the initial needs to boil around first and foremost, what is the problem? If you're really saying, what is the problem that you're hoping we can solve for you? So you have to get clear on what they say the problem is, not what you think the problem is, what they say the problem is. The second one is really process. What's your process to solve the problem? And then, of course, price. What's your investment to solve that? If your initial consultation doesn't address how to address their problem, making sure they're clear what the issue is that they're bringing to you to solve, if you don't have a visual process map and then you're not clear on your pricing, then you're probably not you're probably not having a good point for you and I, Jim, to even talk to them about how to improve their initial consultation because they don't have enough foundation in their initial consultation to work with. And on pricing, I'm a big fan of price lists. I think you should have a written price list that lists your prices so it doesn't look like you're mood pricing. You're making it up based on the day of week, what kind of watch they have, what they're disclosing on their finances. There's so many emotional issues that go into from the prospect's perspective that your job is to, as the attorney, is to reduce the stress and wear and tear on that prospect so they can see that you've got this thought through, that, there's no making up pricing, there's no winging, your process looks like this, and you're clear and you listen to their problem. And that's really, I think, the three big challenges I've seen with lawyers in initial consultation, especially when they're new to the field. They're winging it.
Yeah, I like your idea with the price list because you were giving the example of like, they want a nice watch. Yay, maybe, this would be their price, winging the price. But for whatever reason, I've also heard more than once, they think, well, this person doesn't have the money. And then they lowball a price. And then they find out when they take the price that this person has a considerable amount of assets and they lowballed them and they missed out on a fair opportunity because they had this preconceived notion in their mind that this person probably wouldn't be able to afford their quote unquote typical pricing. So the price list fixes it on both extremes.
Yep. This is a big emotional problem for lawyers. And it's also a sign that they haven't thought through their practice model. It's important to understand that if your prices as a lawyer don't align in those three models, it confuses the prospect.
That kind of ties into, again, something earlier from this conversation where we're like, hey, growth for the sake of growth, what's the point of that, right? And so doing stuff like that and having, your why do you do this? That kind of will put you into one of those buckets, right? If you're doing this to be the commodity, well, then that's fine, right? If you're doing this to be the expert, that's awesome as well, right? But at least be aware, right? Be self-aware enough to know that you're doing it for a reason. I don't know. I feel like it's kind of like everything that we do at Bambiz is always working backwards. We always work backwards. Like if you can tell us where you want to be, we can tell you how to get there. And
that's
so
a strategy.
Yeah,
it's strategy. It's like, tell me what your goal is and I can help you with the strategy. But if you're not clear where you're trying to go, it's very hard for me to tell you how to get there. Right.
Yeah. What does winning look like if we don't know where the goal is?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And most of them are being busy to live, just being busy to live. They don't have a chance to breathe. They don't have a chance to think. They're probably not going to be able to listen to this whole podcast. They're just frazzled and they're trying to figure out how the hell become focused. And I know that because I've been there. I've been there 1,000 times. I totally get it.
Is there any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to throw out there for the listeners?
No, I was going to say, I'm going to give you my LinkedIn profile if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can check us out on the web at atticusadvantage.com. And if there's anything that we can help you with, you can always email us at grow@atticusadvantage.com. 2 podcasts where I've interviewed people that I think might help. So one is on an attorney named Victor Medina, who was a sales professional before he went to law school. And he's talking about how to improve your sales skills. So I think that would be good. The one about having non-lawyer initials, I've given you that. I'm going to give you that one as well. And then I think the third one that I'm going to give you is one on just really straightforward referral-based marketing, which is with one of our team members, Denise Collin. And so I'll give you those 3 links. So if people want to do deeper dives on 3 topics, they can do that, or they can pop it into AI and get the top 5 summarized if they want. I don't know. But
Yeah, we'll,
thank
we'll,
you.
we'll we'll put those links in the show notes. Atticus, I mean, is great. If you have any questions about that, Steve said the website, atticusadvantage.com. They're going to help you grow. They're going to help you live the life, have the practice that you want. So definitely reach out to them, learn more about what they do there. They do a lot of events here in Florida. I know that they do them elsewhere as well. It's always good to come to Orlando, and go to the parks, enjoy the sunshine, and get a little education as well. So, Steve, it has been an honor to have you on the podcast. It's an honor to talk to you all the time as well, and to have you be a friend over the years. So, again, thank you so much for being on here. Thank you for educating our audience.
Thank you, Jim. It's always a privilege to hang out with you. So thank you very much for the invitation.
All right. Until next time, everything will be in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to Elder Law Growth, and we'll see you on the next episode.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Elder Law Growth Podcast, your one-stop shop for all things marketing for elder law and estate planning law firms. Here you can find all of the tools and skills you need to market your own practice without wasting your time. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review wherever you're listening. And if you're ready to take the pressure off and let our team handle your marketing, visit Bambiz.net and book a free call with us today.